Hello and welcome to episode number 57 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and man, oh man, is this a special episode. An all-time great, if I do say so myself, has agreed to join the show, and I'm so excited to get this conversation going. Before we dive into it here, a quick social media plug is in order. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news by featured guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. If you want to follow my personal Twitter, it's at Chelney Andrew. Please rate the show if you enjoy listening. It means more to me that I can put into words. Every time you like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, follow it on Spotify, etc. It makes me feel great and helps the show out as well. I've ordered a lot of food over the years, and unless any of those places want to sponsor the show, I don't make any money off the podcast. This is done out of love in my spare time. So when I see a new rating, a review, a share, or whatever else, it makes me feel great. So please do that if you haven't already. Chel Squared is also a part of National Podcast Network, a network dedicated to NHL podcasts. Check the show out on there by going to nationalpodcast.network/Chel Squared. And though I am a SiriusXM employee, this podcast is not affiliated in any way with the company. The opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone and may or may not reflect the views of SiriusXM. I mean, I don't know. If you're angry at my takes, direct them to me and me alone, please and thank you. Now that that's out of the way, it is my honor to welcome to Chel Squared play-by-play broadcaster for the Carolina Hurricanes at NBC Sports, John Forslund. John, it is an absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Welcome to the show. How are you? And congrats on the contract extension with the Hurricanes.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for all of that, and thanks for having me. I look forward to our discussion here and wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. How is the offseason treating you? Are you still busy, or do you finally have some time to kind of kick back and relax a little bit?
No, I have plenty of time to relax and just get reacquainted with my family, which we do every summer and have done for a long time. We come up to the seacoast of Maine and kind of unwind for about a month. So we're blessed to be able to do that. The kids are older now, so they come and go, the two older ones, but my youngest is still with us full time. And we just have a remarkable time of reconnecting because in this business, it's you're on the go constantly, and it's been I've had a long career, been fortunate enough for that to happen, but that means you miss a lot. You're lots of time on the road, and you have to reconnect and do what's most important.
How do you balance that? You know, you've done this for so long that you've kind of have a knack for it now, but how do you balance the professional life of constant travel and preparation and not being able to see your family versus during the summer, now you finally have a chance to talk to them a little bit more than you usually do and all of that?
It's a great question, because this is a type of business and career that becomes, for lack of a better expression, almost like a drug. It's something that you get addicted to. It's something that you have to be careful you don't become a workaholic, because all of us who either aspire or in this industry absolutely love it, have a tremendous passion and a lot of ambition. And you put all that together, it can become a potion that can be deadly if you do it the wrong way. So it's like anything. You have to be sure you're balanced. You have to keep your feet on the ground. And I'm not an expert, but, I do think our family is tight-knit. And I think what we've been able to do, not only with my marriage, but also with our children, is when you're home, you're home. And that's really important, because they'll get it. They understand there's two people in our family. There's John Forslund, the professional, and then there's Dad, or the husband. They're two different people. And if you cross over either way, I think it's dangerous. And again, I don't want to preach on this subject, but I do think I speak from experience. And I do know that in our industry, there's a lot of disjointed families, a lot of people who just can't make it for a variety of reasons. But one of those reasons primarily is the wedge that can come between the couple, the family, and the job. And so you have to be careful with it. And I would advise anybody that's starting out to keep that in mind if that's the road you want to go down. It's not for everybody. You don't necessarily have to take that route. But if you elect to have a family, you have to make your decision. I think you have to be all in both ways. And it's hard, and you have to sacrifice on a couple of ways. Your family has a sacrifice too. I've been fortunate enough that that my wife has stood behind me my entire career, including the early years in the minor leagues where you struggle, you don't make a lot of money, you're hoping your dream comes true someday, you're not sure it will, you get rejected. If you don't have a strong person behind you during those formative years as a professional, you're really not going anywhere. So thank God we've been blessed to have all of that fall into place so far, and we just continue to work at it every day.
Well, let's start then at the beginning of your broadcasting career. You got your bachelor's from Springfield College, then you got your master's in Adelphi, then you went back to Springfield to work for the now defunct Springfield Indians. You said before the show that you got hired full-time January 1985. So was play-by-play something that you always wanted to do, or maybe it was something that you tried once in, I don't know, high school and thought, hey, this is fun, I could do this for a living?
Yeah, my career path is far different than most, and certainly way different than most young professionals today. And you have to understand what the world was like in the 70s and what the world's like today to understand both ends of the spectrum. Today, there's all kinds of opportunity, a lot more competition. But you can, as you can go to school, you can major in it. You go to a great place like Syracuse. You come out with a degree that could take you a long way and should. Or you can kind of look back at a career like mine. It's very unconventional. I don't suggest the way I did it for anybody today, but certainly in my day, it worked. I think I had some luck on my side, but I'll try to make my story short. In 1970, when the Boston Bruins won the Stanley Cup and Bobby Orr scored that goal that's etched in all hockey fans' memories, the goal against the St. Louis Blues that clinched the cup in overtime, where he takes the pass from Derek Sanderson from behind the net, beats the great Glenn Hall, and then is upended by Pierre Pilote, the defenseman, goes flying through the air, and they capture that photo, and that photo lives on forever. That's the day, Mother's Day, May the 10th, 1970, where I was hooked in terms of not just the sport, but the cadence of play-by-play and the broadcasting of hockey. Dan Kelly was the announcer on CBS at the time. I know exactly where I was. I know the position I was in front of the television set. And I knew at that time, and I was 8 years old, this is something I might want to try. So during my formative years from that point on, I was a very good student, but I didn't do enough reading for my mom's liking, especially in the summer. And we tried to read all the classics, and I was having a tough time, getting there because I was a baseball player, and I always wanted to be outside and I wanted to be playing ball and all these things that any normal kid would want to do. But my mom, God bless her, wanted to make sure that I had some type of reading background, so I get through my preparatory years and on into college and so on. So she encouraged me to read everything I could about the sport of hockey. And so I did, ad nauseum. And I read all about the history. And late at night, like most aspiring broadcasters, I'd listen to my transistor radio. I'd listen to ball games around the country, the stations I could pull in. I'd listen to talk radio as far away as Cleveland, I remember, in my young years, from Springfield, Massachusetts. And, I would then, as a teenager, get into a hobby where I would announce the games off the television. And my dad was my color man, and we did this every single night. And the Bruins in those years on Channel 38 televised every game. And so I did every game and prepared for games and figured out a system and a score sheet and kind of did that through high school. Now, I was a high school athlete. And I played a lot of baseball and basketball and football, the conventional sports. I got a late start with hockey at 12, and my ego got in the way. And the only regret I ever have is I didn't push hockey far enough for me as an athlete, because I just couldn't get by the fact that I was behind some kids that were younger than me because I got a late start into it. And so I never really went anywhere with it as an athlete, but I kept this in my back pocket, this hobby of mine, through college. I went to college. I was going to be want to be a coach. I wanted to be a college baseball coach someday. And they offered one course at Springfield College as an elective in broadcast journalism. It was 1981, and the final exam was a voiceover of the Super Bowl that year between the Bengals and the 49ers. And the course was taught by a news director at the NBC affiliate. And I went in and I prepared, and a lot of my buddies were encouraging me to take this course because I would fool around at parties and whatnot and imitate guys off the TV, and they get a kick out of it. Some of the guys thought I had some ability. And anyway, I started announcing the Super Bowl off the video and doing the voiceover. And when it was over, he told me, I got to tell you something. First of all, he said, if you're interested, I'd like to bring you into the station and give you a little test on camera. And I think I can offer you a job with one of our affiliates around the country if you want to shift gears and go into this. And if you don't, just keep in mind, if anybody ever gives you a chance to do this for a living, go for it, because you have something that you really can't teach in a classroom. You have a knack for doing this. So I kept that in the back of my mind. I finished my college career. I had an assistantship and graduate work at Adelphi University, taught school during the day, coached some football and baseball, went to school at night. And the last thing I had to do to get my master's was an internship, and I failed at a couple of places I really thought I wanted. One was with the United States Military Academy at West Point, working on their football show. That year, the Army-Navy game was at the Rose Bowl, and it was helping produce and being on air, and it was a paid internship for their college station, which was kind of syndicated to various stations around the country. So it was kind of an interesting opportunity. I didn't get it, and I fell into this internship with the Springfield Indians in the American Hockey League. And the owner of the team asked me before he gave me the position, do you have any broadcast experience? And I said, oh yeah, I've got plenty. But he never asked me the next question was for who, and do you have any tapes? Do you have anything you can share with me? He just said, well, that's good. I have a guy doing play-by-plays. He's his first year. He needs a partner. Why don't you do some color as part of your internship? So I obviously agreed to it. And in January of that season, the 845 season, they hired me. And that fellow left after 1 year. They offered me the job, and I stayed there and worked 7 years at the American Hockey League level and did the public relations group, sales, marketing, most importantly for me, the radio broadcasting. And that led to my opportunity in the National Hockey League, and that's how it started. But I didn't go to school for it, and I was actually dissuaded against it by my high school guidance counselor, who had great intentions, but when she had me, she told me, and I told her what I wanted to do, and I specifically said I want to be a play-by-play broadcaster in the National Hockey League. She said, can we rethink this? Because that's a little bit too targeted for me, and I think you're going to need a backup plan, the old backup plan speech, and I went for it, something that was more maybe suited for me at the time, and certainly something that seemed on more firm ground than this pie-in-the-sky dream. But the pie-in-the-sky dream worked out for me. That's how it all went down. And, a lot of things had to fall into place. I was lucky, but I worked hard, extremely hard, because I took this so seriously to kind of hone a craft, and was lucky enough to find a niche.
That's incredible. You gotta have the backup plan just in case, just in case anything happens. But it's awesome that you chased that dream and it worked out for you as well. While with Springfield, your hey what do you say phrase became a staple of your broadcast. Where did that saying come from? How did you come up with it, and how did it end up in your broadcast?
So when I was hired in January of 1985, and this is a sad story with a great ending. I was hired in second week of January in 1985, and the first day that I was hired, about a week afterwards, I received my first paycheck, obviously, and it was that night that I did a game. And I was still living at home with my parents at the time. I grew up in Springfield, and again, by chance, had landed this opportunity with the local hockey team, which wasn't the plan, but kind of was meant to be, so it worked out that way. Anyway, I did the game that night, came home after going out with my then fiance, who's now my wife, and my dad passed away at the age of 59 in his sleep. And I was home for it, applied CPR, failed, obviously. It was a horrific day and weeks to come in my life at the age of 22. And the only thing I wanted to do was show him my paycheck the next day, because it had a team logo on it. And it was actual money. I was earning money to do this. I couldn't believe it. When my dad passed on, he was my best friend. And he was a big, big positive influence in having me never give up on this pipe dream of mine, always encouraging me. As I told you before, he did color on these tapes that I wish I still had. I lost them in a some flooding that occurred in my mom's home years ago, but I had all the tapes on cassette of the two of us together. But he passed on, and it was his phrase. He used to say that when he met people. He used to say it when he coached us in baseball as kids, hey, what do you say? So it was maybe that season, and I this is kind of cloudy for me exactly when I decided to do it, but I remember being on a bus to Hershey or Baltimore or something like that. It was a long trip, and I wanted to do something that would bring my dad's memory back for me. And so I was going to use the phrase somehow, and I used the phrase on a goal. And I kind of liked it. And back in those days, who knows, Andrew, how many people are actually listening, right? So I might have been broadcasting just for me and maybe the team owner at the time, but it sounded good to me. And then I decided I was going to stamp goals that were meaningful in terms of closing out the game in my mind. So I started doing it. And I did it throughout my formative years in Springfield, which led to the last two seasons, two championship seasons, two Calder Cups in 1990 and 91. And those are the years where, obviously, when the team has success as announcers, if you're a team announcer, you get more notoriety because the team now is getting more exposure, and these calls are tremendous. And so the local newspaper picked up on this. It became my phrase. So then I had to decide when I got to the major league level, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to continue to use it? And for me, absolutely so. And listen, there's been some kickback on this over the years. Many people, I think, now enjoy it and like it. But early on, there were cynical people, media critics. Things were, put down in the Hartford papers, especially, that it was hokey and this and that, trite saying, whatever. I never defended it. I didn't have to because it was for me. I just continued to do it. And luckily, through longevity and the length of my career, I've been able to do this time and time again, kind of conjure up his memory in my own mind, utilize it for those reasons, and it's stuck. And I'm happy that it has. And that's why I do it. I don't necessarily do it on the national stage because, as you know, you have to be down the middle, and I don't want to throw any more flowery things at one team over the other. So I don't do it there. But on my local broadcasts, I do with the Hurricanes, and that's what it's for. So it could be a goal with 10 minutes left. It could be a goal, obviously, in overtime. We all know the game's over then, right? So that's when I do it. And that's how it came about.
I'm a huge fan of when the writers were disagreeing with that phrase. You didn't even say anything. You were just like, you know what? I'm just gonna keep doing it, and I don't care what you write in the papers. I absolutely love that mentality. In '89, you won the Ken McKenzie Award for Best Broadcaster, and then 2 years later, you were hired by the Hartford Whalers as their PR director and not their play-by-play guy. You weren't going to be in the booth for the first few years as a member of the Whalers. Tell me how that conversation went.
Well, I had to make a decision. I had struck out a few times. New Jersey Devils radio, Dale Arnold was doing that at the time. He had come from the Maine Mariners in the American Hockey League. He was taking a job with the New England Patriots, and he actually recommended me for the Devils radio gig, and I didn't get it. And there was a couple other things that happened. San Jose Sharks were coming into fruition. They were hiring. I didn't get that. My good friend, Dan Rusanowski, we grew up together as broadcasters. He with New Haven, me with Springfield. He got it. I didn't. I had to figure out where I was going with this. My wife and I got married in 1986. This would be 1991. I had been at the American League level for 7 years. I wasn't making any money at all. Any chance at making any kind of coin came from selling advertising in the off season, which I wasn't very good at. I didn't enjoy it. I had to figure out, what was the next step. So in Hartford, they had decided they had a PR director who was an accomplished guy and had done a wonderful job there for years. But what they wanted to do was create a position within their hockey office where hockey information was disseminated through one individual. And that individual would be me. And I would work in concert with the GM. The business side would work with the PR director. The PR guy would basically be my boss. I would work in his department, but most of my contact would be strictly with the team. And also they knew I was a broadcaster, so they were going to hire me to be a color man for Chuck Caton, the legendary radio announcer for the Hartford Whalers at the time. I took that job. Within a week, my the gentleman who was the PR director at the time saw this, didn't like it, had another opportunity with the Pittsburgh Penguins, decided to quit, and left the PR job open. I was brought back to Hartford for a meeting with the general manager and the owner of the team. They offered me a sensational deal that I couldn't refuse. More money than I've ever made, something I knew I could do, something I didn't really want to do. But I was 29 at the time. I was the youngest PR director in the National Hockey League. I had a boatload of people that would work underneath me, and it was a managerial job. And I decided, you know what? It had benefits. It had a real salary. It was in the NHL. It had a 401k attached to it. My wife and I could start a family. There's a lot of things that work for us. I don't have to really move. I'm going from Springfield to Hartford. I'm going to do this. And so I did. I had to back off a little bit of the broadcasting because the job was all-encompassing, and having a PR guy on the air doing broadcasting isn't exactly what you want to have. So I did a little bit of it just to keep my feet wet, but I'm also just committed to that. Now, from 91 to 94 were the most tumultuous years for the Hartford Whalers. Ownership change, threats to move. They came off a big unpopular trade of Ron Francis. The team wasn't very good. The season ticket base started to fall. And I hope it wasn't because of me, but I happened to be there at that time and had to handle all this stuff. And what ended up happening was new ownership came in 1994. With that new ownership, Peter Karmanos, Jim Rutherford as general manager, they brought me in. They asked me what I wanted to do with my career. And I told them, I don't have a problem doing what I'm doing now, but I really want to continue down the road of being a broadcaster. And I was also freelancing for Sports Channel at the time, doing the American Hockey League Game of the Week. So I was still doing one game a week on television and trying for some other things, like the Islanders job. Jiggs McDonald was stepping aside. That was going to change. Didn't get that. So there were a lot of things going on. And they being the Karmanos Group, elected to give me a chance to do some broadcasting, do the PR for their first season, and then see what happens. There was a lockout that year. It was a 48-game schedule. I went from having the opportunity of doing 10 games over the air in the ABC affiliate to doing one, because it was only 48 games instead of 82. Sports Channel, which was going to do 72 games with 10 being over the air on Channel 8 out of New Haven, was reduced to a 47-game schedule. One game on Channel 8. They let me do it. So I did the one game, and after that game, Jim Rutherford had some people that he trusted within the industry listen to it. Contracts were expiring with Sports Channel. The announcers at the time were paid for and employed by Sports Channel. The team wanted their own people, so they decided to make a change. So they offered me the television job going into the 95-96 season. Darryl Ray, who's now the color man in Dallas, was my partner. We were first-year guys together, and that's where it started. So that, too, like my broadcasting career to begin with the Indians, was kind of an indirect path. And it just happened to be to fall into place. And that's how that came about.
And before you started doing the broadcasting again for the Whalers, you worked under Bryan Burke for a period of time when you were the PR director. And before his public announcement of the storm surge, calling it quote-unquote pee-wee garbage stuff, what was he like, and what were some of the memories with him that still stick out to you?
He's one of the best guys that I ever worked for. He was driven, young. He was the youngest and brightest up-and-coming GM at the time, but brash, and opinionated. And he's the guy that took away the Brass Bonanza theme song. He didn't like that. He said the players didn't like it. A lot of the players didn't, but he didn't like it, and he got rid of it. And I was the guy that brought him the petition that the fans had signed and said, we've been using AC/DC's Thunderstruck for 1 year. Here are the names. Here are the signatures. Many of them are season ticket holders. They want this song back. He ended up leaving for a job at the NHL because he lasted only really one season as the general manager, went on to become the VP of the NHL. We ended up bringing the song back under the new ownership. The Rutherford regime brought it back and lived with it until the team finally left. And it's still a cult thing now, right? So it's kind of interesting. But I enjoyed working for Bryan Burke. I did. He gave me a lot of responsibility, and again, we were trying to rebuild it, and he had a plan. It's just that the ownership was in flux. The fan base wasn't right. There was unrest among the fans. The team wasn't very good. It had to get really bad before it got good again. And he was going into a rebuild. And I don't think anybody in Hartford was ready for a rebuild of any kind. They just about had it. And that kind of led to some of the decisions that were made down the road.
And in 97, the team ultimately did move to Carolina to become the Hurricanes. How did you first find out the team was relocating and that they want you to move with them?
Well, that story is interesting because I forget the exact date, middle of March. I know the opponent. I know what happened in the game. So Colorado was in town, the great Patrick Waugh in goal. The Whalers outshot the Avalanche by a 3-1 margin that night. The Avalanche won the game. And I lived back in Springfield at the time. So my wife and I drove home after the game. We got home, put on the local news, and that's where we found out. There was some rumor. There were rumors out there. There was a lot of speculation that this would be happening, but I didn't see it coming at that particular time, and put on the news. And a guy by the name of Tom Monahan, Channel 30 in Hartford, was at Capitol Hill and broke the story and said the team was moving, but we didn't know where. So that was how I found out. The next day there was an organizational meeting, and we were told that some people would go and some people wouldn't. You'll find out soon, so stay tuned for details. That was not an easy thing to go through. And we finally found out that we were going to be able to move with the team. They wanted me to move with the team. But at the end of all of that, and going into May, because I believe it was in May when the decision was finally made to go to the Raleigh-Durham area, there were rumors about Norfolk, Virginia, and Columbus, Ohio, and different places like that. And then, of course, Raleigh-Durham was a place that they settled on. But Fred Cusick had retired as the longtime Boston Bruins voice, and was asked in the Boston Herald about a successor. And he threw my name out there. And Fred and I really didn't have a relationship. I idolized him as a young man. And I was respectful of him, and we were kind of colleagues, I guess, but he kept to himself at that stage of his career. He'd come in, he'd call the games, he'd leave. He didn't have a lot to say to anybody. But I loved him. And he said that, John Forslund would be an ideal successor for my job, the guy that does the games in Hartford. And so Channel 38 called me, and I auditioned for the job with 1 year remaining on my contract. At the time, Nesson had the home games, 38 had the road games. This was for the road game package. It got down to 3 finalists, myself, Dave Shea, and Sean McDonough. And I'm not sure they were going to go down my road. They ended up giving the gig to Dave Shea. Sean was moving on to bigger things, and was pricing himself, I think, at the time because of his dealings with the Red Sox and national work and all that. Maybe it wasn't the right fit for him. But whatever the case, I had a year to go, and Jim Rutherford asked me to come to Carolina. And please, after the loyalty he showed me at one time, could I be loyal to him with a year to go? And I said, absolutely. So we went down. And we started that in 97, and it was a great decision because it led to all this time, and we were able to raise our family there, and that's how we got the news, and that's how we decided, we're going to go down to the Carolinas and see how this hockey thing was going to work.
What were your initial reactions to the idea of hockey in a quote-unquote non-conventional hockey market? Like initially it was Greensboro and then Raleigh shortly after that. Were you surprised by the location, or were you excited for the idea that, hey, this could absolutely work in a place that isn't, I guess, technically considered the hotbed of professional hockey back then?
Well, when Gary Bettman as commissioner took over in the early 90s, he decided that the league needed more of a national footprint. It was regionalized. It was mostly in the northeast of the U.S. It was obviously through Canada. There's a franchise in St. Louis, there's a franchise out in Los Angeles, but it was really regionalized. And in order to keep up with a national footprint from an advertising standpoint and your general growth of population, you had to move these teams. You had to get some action going in Florida. You had to cultivate Dallas, Texas. You had to somehow get to Arizona. You had to add another team in the Los Angeles market if you could. The San Jose thing was a hit from day one. But in order to do that, not every team could be an expansion team. So you had to relocate troubling franchises. And before the salary cap, which the league didn't get to until 2004, Bettman wanted it in 94, and that's why that lockout happened. He was always saying that this league was in trouble because the blood was starting to show on better than half the league financially. And they had to figure out better markets to get to in order to get that national footprint. So Raleigh-Durham made some sense, but don't forget the Hurricanes were not an expansion team. And I believe it was the quickest relocation of any professional franchise from, the middle of May to the following September. You're moving, you're getting your operation up and running, you're moving the players, you're getting a practice rink, you're trying to get some advanced marketing done, you're trying to sell tickets. How do you do that? But Peter Karmanos had a choice. He could have stayed one more year in Hartford, which he felt would have been miserable, the lame duck, or just go. And the animosity between the owner of the Whalers, the local government, the state government was so bad, he just wanted to get out of town, and he did, for better, for worse. So when we got there, it wasn't easy. You're right. We were all living in Raleigh, and we had to get to Greensboro, which is 70 minutes northwest of Raleigh. Every game was played in Greensboro. All the marketing was in Raleigh. The practices were in Raleigh. Everybody lived in Raleigh. And for 2 years, we did that. And it was hard. And many times you would go out and you would see people and you go to, civic groups, you speak at luncheons and so on. And one of the questions you got from the public was, why? And that was concerning. They were asking, why are you bringing hockey here? It wasn't exactly an open arms situation like it was in Columbus. Nashville had to have 12,000 season tickets before they could move. So in those expansion environments, you're going into a place that's already ready for it. The infrastructure is there. They embrace it. That wasn't the case in North Carolina. So you had to go through the growing pains, and we did. But you know what? It made it more rewarding, Andrew. It made it better, I think, as a broadcaster, because you just were not worried about your art form or your broadcasting, your own career that way. You were also making a difference from a growth standpoint as like a pioneer. It was kind of an interesting thing because you're making a difference. You're growing a brand. You're growing the game that you love in an area that's basically virgin territory. So that was kind of different and rewarding.
Well, and you've been the voice of the Hurricanes ever since the move, including being with the team in 2006 when they hoisted their first ever Stanley Cup. You've got the ring to prove it on your finger. Besides the end results of that season, what were some of the moments that you still vividly remember from the early days in Carolina?
Well, that was amazing because that came off the canceled season of 04-05 because of the labor stoppage and a lot of bad blood, and supposedly the Raleigh market would be one of those markets out of sight, out of mind. Would they ever recover from missing the game and missing a whole season's worth of business, for calendar year? Was it possible? Was it ever going to get back to where you wanted it to be? And it was still building at the time. 04 rolled around. The team went to the Stanley Cup final in 02, lost to Detroit in 5 games. The NHL draft was in Raleigh in 04. It started to hit its popularity at an all-time high, and then this lockout came. But that team was special. That team was a great team from start to finish. The coach, Peter Laviolette, who's now in Nashville, did a remarkable job with that group of players. They won 52 games. And the playoff run was validation for what was an exceptional season. So I like those stories. Playoff runs can be Cinderella-like and magical, and we've all seen that in all of the sports. Those are fun too. But when you have a great season, start to finish, and then you go on this long run and become the champion, the way they did, you can never forget it. And we were able to share in all those great moments. The ownership of the team handled us as broadcasters like you wouldn't believe. We received, and so did our spouses, player rings. We were in the parade. We got a day with the Stanley Cup. That's not a given for announcers around the league, and a lot of teams are have great ownership, and they just draw the line someplace. And I wasn't expecting that. I thought we wouldn't partake in that. I thought probably after the hockey staff it would end, but as broadcasters we were afforded that opportunity. I'll never forget that, and indebted to Peter Karmanos, the owner of the team, for giving us as a family that opportunity to have the Stanley Cup for a day. But great moments. But I'll tell you what, that team in '06 and the two championship teams that I was a part of in '90 and '91 were very similar. And the job was very similar. The only difference was NHL, AHL, more people, more exposure, more attention, but the conditions, the working conditions as a broadcaster were identical. And the feel I had in all of those three situations was the very same. I remember, coming home and telling my wife, in February, you're going to do it. I can feel it. And you get that when you're around a special group of athletes and the coaching staff. You understand, where they're headed and what could be possible. And in those three instances, those teams had that special chemistry and ingredient that I was convinced they were going to do it. But it took 7 games. It took an unbelievable Stanley Cup final in '06 to get to January 19th. And in Raleigh, it happened in the 7th game. And boy, you'll never forget that. I'll tell you that.
What did you do with the Stanley Cup on your day?
Well, the original plan was to take it to the Raleigh School for the Blind in the morning. At a 9 a.m. visitation. We were going to do that. And unfortunately, we had to cancel that because it was occupied the night before and missed its early flight. And so I didn't get the cup itself until 11 o'clock the next day. But then I could carry on with the rest of the plan. The rest of the plan was to take it to my kid's school. And so what we did was we opened it up to everybody, all classes, and we had 15-minute history lessons and photo opportunities for every class in the school, pre-K through 8th grade. And so about 600 kids and their families had the opportunity to see it at that time. And then we took it to a local restaurant where I invited people that I couldn't invite to the house for the party that started around 7 o'clock that night. But between 4 and say 6:30, we're at this restaurant, photo opportunity, shared it with a bunch of people, then took it to my house. And then that party got totally crashed, and it turned in a good way, and it turned into a long receiving line where people would just come in and come in through the house and come down to the basement out on the patio where it was, take a picture and leave. And that went on from about 7 to 1 in the morning. Kept it there. The keeper of the cup stays with it. He slept in the house that night, and then it went on to Chuck Caton the next day. That's what we did. So I think we counted up the amount of people that probably saw it. It was probably 1,000 people, no exaggeration, that had a chance to see the cup. If it ever happens again, I'm not sure we're doing it that way. I don't think I ate. I don't think I sat down. I don't think I thoroughly enjoyed it in private time. I wish I had an opportunity to sit there and read the names and go back through history, probably do something different if we ever get a chance again. That probably won't happen. But that was a once in a lifetime. And had we taken it to the Raleigh School for the Blind, probably another 100 people would have seen it. So maybe 1,100 people had a chance to see the cup. But I'm proud of that because that's what it's all about. It's a people's trophy. That's why the Stanley Cup is special.
I had Kevin Westgarth on a few weeks ago, and he told me that he ate Domino's out of the cup. So I can't decide which story is which story is better.
Well, we did the same thing. The kids had cereal the next morning before it left, and we had my in-laws were there. My mom was still alive. She was there. She lived with us. She was in that's a side trip because of in her memory. I like to bring it up because she was in a nursing home at the time. I had to bring the cup to the nursing home to get her to convince her to come to the house. She wanted to stay there. She didn't want to come to the party. And an old Italian woman, stubborn as can be. So I had to convince her to come, and she did. And anyway, everybody in the nursing home took a picture with it. And that was another opportunity. But that, again, was just another of these stops along the way that we made. And as a family, we were just exhausted, but for all the right reasons.
That's I love that story. And with the ups, like in 2006, of course, there were also a number of down years in the following seasons. Fans of other teams in the latter parts of the years when the team wasn't doing well at all, other teams fans were joking that the Hurricanes should move. They have no fans, etc. As a broadcaster, how do you approach the down years of an organization and still bring the same amount of passion as you would if the team is a contender?
I try to keep this in mind all the time. As cliche as it may sound, every season has a story. And so it's your responsibility to tell that story and to tell it the right way. And what I mean by that too is, as a team broadcaster, make the right decisions. Understand that people are hanging on every word you say. If they're going to appreciate and respect your job, you have to be as objective as you can be. There's no question people listen to my broadcast. They should know, what side of the bread it's buttered on. They should know that my heart's with the Hurricanes. I want them to be successful. But I'm proud of the fact that over time, I think I've been as down the middle as I possibly can be as a team broadcaster. And I'm proud of that. I get really excited on great moments for our team. I use the phrases, go berserk, all those things. That would lead you down the path of being a homer. But homer for me is an ugly word in our business. I don't like it when people are homers to the point where they just ignore reality. Because fans have the right to know why when things aren't going well. And you have to somehow communicate that without getting fired. And that's hard to do. But the fan base has to learn to respect your opinion. Because if they do, when you praise, your praise carries more weight. I've always told my employers this, who have questioned at times, could you be more of a homer? We don't necessarily like the fact that you said this. I've never denigrated a player or coach. I've never denigrated, obviously, the organization I've worked for. But I've pointed out to fans why things aren't going well. And it started to register this season where the Hurricanes had this incredible second half. And as you know, went to the Eastern Conference Final. People would tell me, thank you for keeping the fire burning for 10 years, 10 years without an appearance in the playoffs, and doing it in a way that we were still interested in the Canes enough to come back. We're still interested in the Canes enough to go through the torture of those seasons, because there's reasons why teams fail. They're not just doing it intentionally. They're up against a better opponent. Here's what's happening. Here's why. And be respectful of the athletes who are giving everything they can, for the most part, to make it better, and they can't get it done. And so that's the type of mindset I've had. So people have always said, oh, you must be having fun this year. No, and I honestly can say that. No, I've had fun in the non-playoff years, plenty of it. Sure, the results aren't good. Sure, it's hard to get on that airplane with those guys. It's hard to be quiet all the time, or put on that face after the game and share in their emotion a little bit, or at least be respectful of it. It gets tiresome at times. Coaches get short with you. They don't want to give you as much time. They don't want to answer your questions. Athletes get a little bit irritated. They might take it out on you because you're around all the time as the team guy, and you're an easier target than, say, a national writer, national broadcaster, or some guy from a local TV affiliate who they might want to take his or her head off, but won't. Maybe it's you. Those are things you have to take a deep breath and understand where they're coming from and go through it. But in those seasons, those are the years where you have to work exceptionally hard to make sure that you're doing the right thing every day. And I've never lost the passion for it, and hopefully I never will, because when that day comes, I'm done. But that's the whole thing. I care immensely about how well they do, but it doesn't float my boat. If you were to tell me that you could see the future, and you say, hey, John, Andrew here, I can see the future, bad year for the Hurricanes coming up, brace yourself, I'd say, okay, I'm ready for it. I can handle it. Here are the players. Here's what's going on. Here's where they are in their careers. Here's why. And we go from there. And understand that every game needs to be celebrated. You can't stress that enough. That might sound a little bit trite too, but every game needs to be celebrated, because, if you're not into it, if you're not giving everything you can, if you're not as prepared as you should be, then whoever's got the controls watching the television is going to change the channel or turn the radio dial, and that's it. There's too many other things to worry about, too many ways for people today to consume this information. They don't necessarily need us as broadcasters as they used to. And so that's why it's important to stay with it from the passion standpoint.
And you said every game needs to be celebrated. Well, one of the games last year, the Hurricanes had a Whalers night, and you have been with the team since those days. What were your thoughts about Whalers night? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it a mixed bag for you? What were your thoughts on it?
I didn't like the idea at all at the beginning. I didn't like the idea when it was brought up. They're going to do this. I thought it was a marketing ploy, and it is. And so because I was there, and because I went through the heartache and the misery, the emotional tug of war that goes on between the fan base and the team that's leaving, I didn't want to revisit any of that. I have a lot of friends, a lot of family that live in the New England area. I know exactly how a lot of people felt at the time about it, maybe still do. I get a lot of feedback from people that is positive and negative. And I know that because of where I was in my career and who I was associated with, I mean, when I was with the Hurricanes, with the Whalers, and we became Hurricanes, a lot of people view me as one of those people that were part of the move and might not look at me favorably. But you kind of understand that and work through it and hopefully gain the respect I think I have over time. But at first, because of all those reasons, I didn't like it. But then as it got closer, and then when I saw what the uniforms actually look like, and then when the game started, and I wasn't 100% sure. I don't know if you recall this or not, but I have a V-neck sweater. It's a throwback sweater back to the old days with a Whaler crest on it that the NHL store has been selling a lot of this throwback merchandise over the years. My kids bought it for me for Christmas maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It's been in my closet, and maybe I wore it once. I brought it with me, and I wasn't 100% sure I was going to wear it. I wore a green tie. And then just before the live open, I took my sport jacket off and I put the sweater on, and then we started. And when the game started, I loved it, and I loved every single minute of it. It was against the Bruins. The Canes played great. Even now, it's hard for me not to call them the Whalers, right? So it was a great moment. And then we did it again a couple of months later in Boston, equally as good. I was a little bit worried about that one. I didn't know how hostile the crowd would be, but there's so many green sweaters in the crowd in Boston. It was refreshing and a rewarding experience, and then you could reconnect with people. So at first I wasn't a big fan, and now I am. Now I am a fan of it, and I'm happy that Tom Dundon, the owner of the Hurricanes, decided to embrace this part of history and hear Brass Bonanza again after every goal. And there was a boatload of goals scored that night. It was music to my ears.
That's awesome. And not only do you do Hurricanes games, but you also do some nationally televised games for NBC as well. Besides the market that you're broadcasting to, like you mentioned earlier, you don't do the hey, what do you say to make it as neutral as possible. Is there anything you do differently when doing say, Rangers-Flyers game on NBC on a Saturday at 1 p.m. than a standard Canes game?
No, and I think that's important because if you shift, like if you had contrasting styles, it would be hard to do. Certainly the amount of games that I'm fortunate enough to do, I did 20 regular season games for NBC last year, and then, 3 rounds or 2 rounds plus of the playoffs, depending on, how you want to count the games up. But, about 120 hockey games last year. So if you do that and you have contrasting styles, here's my national presentation, here's my regional presentation, I think you're going to get caught. So the mechanics, the preparation, everything's the same, with the exception of goal calls, which are just dialed up on both sides. And goal calls for me are always high and then dialed up further when the Canes score. But I get excited when the other team makes a terrific play because I go back to Dan Kelly, who was my first influence, who always said, never sell a goal down, never sell a big save down, even if it's on the other side. Now, there are going to be guys, and many of my colleagues and my good friends around the league have a different presentation, and they give it the old ski scores when they're the opposition scores. and they're on one side or the other. And they go crazy when their team scores. If that works in your market, if that works for you, great. It's not going to work for me because they get back to my philosophical opinion on how I think it should be done. So that's what I do. So when I do cross over to national games, there isn't much of a change. I pride myself on my prep. I watch a ton of hockey every night, every single night, no exaggeration. So I have book knowledge, not great knowledge, book knowledge on every team, great knowledge on my own team. But I can go from a game on the East Coast to a game in the Western Conference on consecutive nights and not have to do a lot of homework because I'm prepared. And so that's how I look at it. So I see myself as a team guy first and foremost, but over the years, I've been lucky enough to enhance my role with NBC, that it's more of a national presence. So I'm a national guy too. So I'm well versed on the depth charts of every team and where they are organizationally and all that stuff, because you have to.
One of the players that you worked with over the years was Ron Francis, and it was announced recently that he would be the first general manager of the new Seattle expansion team. Amongst the rumors that he and Dundon didn't see eye to eye when both were in Raleigh. In your opinion, what went sour with Ron in Carolina?
Just a philosophical difference of how one guy wanted to do it. Now the other guy was doing it and wanted to keep doing it. So the other guy, the first guy, is Tom Dundon, and how he wanted to do it. He wanted to get in there and he wanted to shake the tree. He's been a maverick owner. He's been outspoken, opinionated. He has a lot of different views on how he wants to get somewhere. He's one of these people that does not want to hear about how things have been done in the past. He wants to live in the now. He wants information. He loves analytics. All those things, which I think, especially with analytics, I think that's a good thing. That's how he wants to operate his team. The question he kept asking was, how can we get to a spot quicker? And Ronnie, I believe, in my own opinion, was convinced that he needed to stay the course with his plan, and he wasn't ready to become as aggressive in terms of trading young players and prospects as maybe Tom was at the beginning of his ownership. And that's where the divide came. And because of that, I think that's why, Ron was moved out of there and the Hurricanes have moved forward. And if you look at the way the Hurricanes have operated under Dundon, it's been aggressive. They've been able to make big trades. Ron's next step as a manager, in my opinion, will be to add some of that to his acumen that he already has in place, which is a very intelligent approach of drafting and developing, being patient, and allowing your plan to get through. And, I think with support, you, as a general manager, you're only as good as who is supporting you, which is the ultimate person, the owner or ownership group. And so if your owner agrees with you, you're good. If your owner doesn't agree with you, you're not good. It's as simple as that. And I think that's what happened to Ron. So now Ron will get to an expansion team where I think all of the good that he has, the planning, the intelligence, the eye for talent, the ability to surround himself with good people, all those things are going to come into play and he'll do a great job. He's going to have to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of trades and how to fix things quickly or how to adjust his team than he was as a first time around general manager. But we all learn on the job. And we all change over the course of time. I've changed as a broadcaster from the very beginning to where I'm at now. At least I believe I have. So he'll do that too. Dundon basically wanted to go down the road where they're headed right now, and you can't argue against the Hurricanes because when you look at the players that are in the fold that he inherited, yes, they're better because Ron was astute enough to accrue all these prospects, draft choices, put that in place as the foundation. But Don Waddell as GM, Dundon as owner, have been able to get aggressive, like a 5-player trade they made with Calgary last year at the draft that took them to a place. The trade they made midseason this year, Victor Rask for Nino Niederreiter, immediate impact there. And some of the moves they made this year, the handling of Aho, which worked out in their favor, the additions of Ryan Dzingel, Eric Holla to enhance their scoring, get quicker, and get to that place where you're playing today's game. They've been a very aggressive team and accrue more draft choices, and get A's across the board from all these draft experts who take a look at drafting team by team and give out letter grades. And the Canes have scored well. So I think that's where the divide was. And it's not unusual when a new owner comes in with an incumbent general manager for there to be some philosophical difference. And I think that's what it was.
John, this has been one of my favorite conversations of all time. I truly can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak to me today. One last question before I let you go. Describe to me the evolution of some of your catchphrases like, "That's hockey, baby," and "The Hurricanes are up and running," and "Ward says no," back when Cam Ward was in the prime of his career playing in Raleigh. We talked about, hey, what do you say? And how did some of these other catchphrases, how did some of these start? And when you said them on air for the first time, did you think they would become staples of your personality? Because like you said, like you mentioned earlier, your hey, what do you say didn't really catch on in the media, but now, at least I think most people love the catchphrases. So how did some of the other ones kind of start up?
Honestly, all of them have been spontaneous, and I just have blurted it out. I can't remember "That's hockey, baby." I don't remember where that started. I do know why it's used, and I like all of them to have a reason. So for me, "That's hockey, baby" has to be a pretty play. That's it. It's not going to be a slap shot from the point. It's not going to be a guy, mucking it up through a scramble, and then it goes off somebody's backside and in the net. Goalie flubs it. That's not hockey for me. Pinpoint passing, a terrific individual move, top cheese, top shelf goal, terrific, well-placed shot. That's hockey. So that's where it comes from. Often running just came off the cuff one night, and I used it early in the game when the first goal scored. All these things hopefully are catchy. I think it draws people in. I've always believed that. I think there's two sides of the fence, with catchphrases. Either you like them or you don't. I think some broadcasters hate them. I get that. And there's people that really like them. I have always felt that it kind of creates a little bit of a tie between that announcer and his market. And so that's what I've been able to do. And there's a bunch of them. Kicked out with a purpose, bevy of humanity, hack and whack time. Hack and whack is just a phrase that's used in hockey. So I just kind of stole, some of these phrases. But Andrew, to be honest, it's been spontaneity. It's been as in the moment, and then I liked it, and then I used it. And today there's immediate feedback. So this is far different than the dark ages where, no Twitter, no opportunity for people to get at you and give you positive or negative views, which we get today. But it was done in the caveman era where we just kind of did it. And the only thing you had to worry about was the odd media critic who would write a media column, which most of the papers had during those years. That would be it. It would be his or her opinion of your work, and you'd leave it at that. Today it's a little different. I like it. I'm on Twitter. I see a lot of it. And I'm okay. I'm okay with positive stuff that people like. People take a shot at me. I'm good with that too. I get it. I think it's fun that you can watch TV and sit there and instantaneously throw something out. The only time I'll jump in the Twitterverse and get on somebody or take it to task is when I think they're being irresponsible with something that I can defend. And the odd time I've done that because I just think, okay, I'm not going to just be a doormat. I'm gonna answer back, and usually they're surprised and answer back, but I want to set the record straight. If it's something that I believe that I was right on, or here's why, and they're off base, it's the only time. But if they say, Forslund's great, Forslund stinks, I'm good with that. I'm good with both ends of that.
Well, I'm glad you used the catchphrases because you saw the graphic that I got made for you on Twitter a few days ago. Great. I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you like it. My graphics guy at ET Designs _ shout out to him. He is a British guy and he has never watched hockey. he has I sent him a lot of stuff about you and your clips and all of that, and out of that, he made that graphic, and I'm constantly blown away at some of the things that he's made for me and for other people in the past. And that's I reached out to him. I asked him to do this because you were coming on, and I wanted it to be a special thing. I don't make a graphic every week because that is expensive, and I can't have him do one every week. But when I have someone like you come on, there has to be something special done, and I'm glad you like that graphic, and I'm glad you have those catchphrases because those were some of the biggest things that were featured in the graphic. So I'm glad you like it.
Well, I thought it was really cool. And again, like I said at the top, flattered by what you said and the opportunity to kind of get on here and go over all this stuff. But yeah, that caught my eye. That was truly special. So please thank him for me, will you?
I absolutely will. I will send him a DM right after this episode. John, I mean, this has been I'll say this over and over again, I guess, until the cows come home. But this has been one of my all-time favorite conversations. Truly honestly, I'm on my bucket list of people to talk to. You are on it. I'm not brown nosing you because you're on. You are legitimately one of my favorite broadcasters to listen to, and to have an opportunity to talk to you for a little bit, have some background, have some stories. This has been I can't even put into words how thankful I am that you gave me some of your time.
Well, I appreciate all of that, Andrew. I want to wish you all the best in your career. I too have done some research, and I think you're on your way, and I think you have a boatload of talent. I know you have the passion, and I encourage you and anybody else who wants to be a broadcaster, takes the time to listen to this podcast. Just be yourself and work hard and stay committed to yourself, and it'll work out. It really will. But carve out your own identity along the way, and just try to do everything correctly. And never give up on it. And those are the things that are pretty simple. But if you adhere to that, I think everybody will be in a good place.
I can't not have a smile on my face when John Forslund tells me I'm on my way. I mean, that you can't see it, but I'm smiling ear to ear. John, again, you're the best, and I really appreciate taking the time.
Anytime, Andrew. Stay in touch.
Absolutely. And this has been episode number 57 of Chel Squared. Number 58 coming up next week. I'll talk to you then.